In the 2023 presidential election, Peter Obi won Plateau State with over 60% of the vote. He won Benue. He came within striking distance in Kaduna. And in the 2 years since that election, not one major Nigerian political outlet has seriously asked what that means for 2027. Everyone is running the same analysis: Tinubu's economic record, Atiku's loyalty networks, who the North will produce as an alternative. That is the conversation filling every panel show and political blog in this country right now. Nobody is asking the question that actually determines whether the Labour Party becomes a permanent national force or quietly collapses into a regional Igbo movement. That question is this: can Peter Obi consolidate the Northern Christian Belt into a coherent voting bloc? And if he does any coalition on earth stop him from reaching Aso Rock? There are approximately 20 to 22 million registered voters across what political scientists call the Middle Belt and Northern Minority States: Plateau, Benue, Nasarawa, Kogi, Taraba, Southern Kaduna, and Southern Kebbi. In 2023, that vote was split, suppressed in some areas, and almost entirely unorganized. Obi won those states anyway. So who is currently building the infrastructure to capture that vote properly in 2027? Is it Peter Obi? Or is someone else moving faster and quieter than he is? That is the question this entire analysis builds toward. Stay with me. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. To understand where 2027 is heading, you need to understand what has shifted in the last 6 months and why those shifts are not being discussed together. 3 things have converged simultaneously. First, the Christian Association of Nigeria, particularly its northern chapter, has quietly changed its tone on partisan politics. It's moving away from the civic neutrality it maintained for the most of the Buhari years and towards something that looks increasingly like strategic electoral positioning. That shift is not loud. It is not on the front pages, but it is happening. Second, the internal Labour Party crisis, the open warfare between Julius Abure's faction and the Obi loyalists, has had an unintended consequence. It's forced Obi to bypass the party structure entirely and build direct constituency networks. And the communities he's building those networks in, most deliberately, are faith communities, particularly in the Middle Belt. Third, the Tinubu administration's economic policies, the fuel subsidy removal, the Naira float, the cascading inflation, have not hit Nigeria evenly. The communities absorbing the deepest damage are civil servant households and smallholder farming families. Those demographics are overwhelmingly concentrated in the Middle Belt states. Obi already won. Now, the surface narrative you are being sold by mainstream political commentary is that 2027 is essentially a Tinubu versus Atiku rematch, with perhaps a northern APC challenger entering late. That framing keeps the entire analysis trapped within the old PDP-APC binary. It treats Nigerian politics like a recycling machine, not a living system. The buried narrative, the one that actually explains what happened in 2023 and what is being built for 2027, is a structural demographic shift that has been accumulating since 2011. That was the year Northern Christians first began visibly splitting from the Hausa Fulani Muslim political elite at the presidential level. That split was marginal in 2011. It was significant in 2015. In 2023, it was decisive in at least 4 states. Now, here is the historical parallel that matters. In 1979, Segun Shagari won the presidency partly because northern minority and middle belt communities had not yet coalesced around an alternative political identity. The moment they began to, in the late Second Republic, it started pulling at the seams of northern political solidarity. The North has always been presented to southern Nigerians as a monolith. It has never actually been one. Now, here is the fact that reframes this entire conversation. In 2023, the combined registered voter population of Plateau, Benue, Nasarawa, and Taraba alone exceeded 8.3 million people. Peter Obi won 3 of those 4 states outright, and Labour Party had no functional ward structure in any of them, not one. He won those states on the energy of a movement, not the architecture of a machine. That distinction, movement versus machine, is the single most important variable heading into 2027. Let's start with the institutional terrain, because the legal architecture of Nigerian elections creates a specific kind of ambiguity that powerful people exploit deliberately. There is no constitutional requirement for zoning, none. Zoning is a party mechanism, an internal elite arrangement for managing power sharing. APC and PDP use it to keep the presidency rotating in a way that satisfies enough of the establishment to prevent open revolt. Labour Party is not bound by that convention in the same way, which means Peter Obi can run as a southeastern candidate without violating a single written rule. But here's where the ambiguity becomes a weapon. Because the northern political establishment, both its Muslim and Christian wings, can frame his candidacy as a southern imposition whenever it becomes strategically useful to do so. The fight over that framing is not happening on television. It's happening in church pulpits across Plateau, in state assembly caucus rooms in Benue, in local government coordination meetings in Nasarawa. That's where the 2027 election is actually being negotiated right now. Now, let's talk about who has the most to lose if this northern Christian consolidation actually happens, because it's not one group, it's 3 simultaneously. The first is the PDP's Northern Governor Network, Fintiri in Adamawa, the Wike political machine, the Enugu-aligned interests. A consolidated Igbo plus Middle Belt coalition collapses the assumption that Igbo political energy is a regional phenomenon that can be contained and managed. If Obi's vote is not an Igbo protest but a national cross-ethnic coalition, the PDP's entire strategy for fragmenting the opposition becomes unworkable.
The second group threatened is the APC's northern Muslim establishment. Their political leverage has always rested on the premise that northern solidarity is essentially religious and therefore durable. If northern Christians exit that solidarity electorally and stay out, that premise dies, and with it, the calculation that the North as a bloc can deliver or deny any presidential candidate. The third and most structurally significant group threatened is the Arewa political elite's ability to present a northern consensus candidate as the natural alternative to Tinubu. That entire strategy depends on northern Christians staying inside the northern political identity. If they don't, the architecture of post-2023 northern politics has to be rebuilt from the foundation. Now, let us run the electoral math, because this is where most analysts stop too early. People hear Obi won the Middle Belt and immediately conclude that he has a Southern plus Middle Belt coalition that can win the presidency. That is not how Nigerian electoral law works. The threshold is not just a plurality of total votes. It requires 25% in 2/3 of states, 24 states. In 2023, Obi cleared that bar nationally but faced legal challenges on its application.
For 2027, the strategic priority is not running up the score in Lagos, Rivers, or Abuja. Those are already priced in. The strategic priority is hitting threshold numbers in Kano, Katsina, and Sokoto, states where northern Christian minorities exist but are numerically small and politically scattered. And here is the counterintuitive insight that any serious Obi campaign strategist already understands. Winning Plateau by 70% is worth less to the electoral math than getting 26% in Kano. That is why the quiet political outreach into Hausa Christian communities, particularly in urban Kano, is more strategically significant than anything happening in Lagos or Enugu. Look at how the regional blocs are positioning themselves. The Yoruba political establishment has a genuine dilemma that it has not yet resolved publicly. If Tinubu runs in 2027 and every signal from the presidency suggests he intends to, Southwest solidarity holds and Obi has to find his margin elsewhere. But if Tinubu does not run, or if his economic record makes consolidating that solidarity impossible, the Southwest fractures between APC loyalty and opportunistic realignment. That fracture would be extraordinarily valuable to a Labour Party campaign. The Igbo political elite itself is split. There are those who believe Obi's best path to Aso Rock is a genuinely broader Nigerian coalition, which means diluting some aspects of Igbo political identity to build cross-ethnic trust. And there are those who believe any such dilution weakens the Igbo political position in the long run, irrespective of whether Obi wins or loses. That internal tension is not trivial. It affects how resources are deployed, how Igbo governors engage the Labour Party structure, and how the Southeast's relationship with the Middle Belt is managed between now and 2027. Then there are the stakeholders who have said nothing, and whose silence is itself information. The Nigerian military's institutional preferences are never stated publicly, but they are always consequential. The security services, the service chiefs, the old northern political military network, they have historically favored predictable, elite-managed transitions. A Peter Obi presidency representing a genuinely non-establishment coalition built on faith networks, diaspora money, and middle-belt grievance would be the most structurally disruptive democratic outcome since 1999. None of these institutions have publicly engaged the Northern Christian consolidation thesis. That silence is not indifference. It is a careful assessment in progress. Now, follow the money, because the financial architecture of this story is where the real institutional question lives. Labour Party's 2023 campaign was funded through a decentralized, diaspora-driven small donor model, unprecedented in Nigerian electoral history. But building ward-level infrastructure in Plateau, Benue, and Nasarawa is a completely different financial requirement. It needs local money, patient money, embedded money, the kind that pays for motorcycles, not media buys. The question of who is financing that organizational effort in the Middle Belt, whether it is Obi directly, Lagos-based Igbo business networks, diaspora remittances channeled through civil society, or something else, is the financial question no Nigerian investigative outlet is pursuing seriously. There's a specific funding channel that keeps appearing in conversations about Labour Party's Middle Belt organizing strategy. Before this analysis closes, we will explain exactly what that mechanism is, where it comes from, and why it matters far beyond this one election. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture.
If Peter Obi wins in 2027 on the back of a Southern plus Middle Belt coalition, he does not just become president, he becomes a president whose political survival is structurally dependent on Middle Belt governors and state assemblies in a way no previous president has been. Think about what that means institutionally. The governors of Plateau and Benue would suddenly hold a form of political leverage they have never held before in the history of this republic. Every major federal negotiation, revenue allocation, security architecture, the ongoing constitutional debate about state policing would have to be cleared through a different set of interests than it is today. The entire geometry of Nigerian federalism shifts not because of any single policy decision, but because of where the president's political debt lives. Now, think about the economic dimension. The communities that delivered Obi's northern margins in 2023, farmers in Benue's food belt, civil servants on Plateau, petty traders in Nasarawa, are the same communities that have been most brutally exposed by the current administration's economic reforms. Fuel subsidy removal hit them without the urban cushion of a diversified income. Naira devaluation wiped out the thin savings margins that smallholder farming families carry. Food inflation in the Middle Belt has not been a statistic, it has been a daily renegotiation of what a family eats. The political implication is direct. Economic pain is radicalizing precisely the voter bloc that any Obi 2027 campaign needs. But here is the danger. Radicalized voters are volatile. They can be channeled towards policy-based political demand, which is what Labour Party needs, or they can be driven back into ethnic and religious grievance politics, which is exactly what APC and PDP's political machines will attempt to engineer between now and 2027. The question is which narrative reaches those communities first and with what organizational support behind it. Now, let's name the funding mechanism I flagged in the power and strategy analysis because it's directly connected to the security dimension of this story, and the connection is not accidental. The financial channel threading through Labour Party Middle Belt organizing connects to a network of faith-based civic organizations. Several of these organizations have affiliations with international Christian democracy movements, the same type of faith-grounded political infrastructure that built governing coalitions in Poland, Chile, and Rwanda. They have been quietly conducting voter registration and political literacy programs in Plateau and Benue since 2021. This is not a conspiracy, it is a well-documented global phenomenon. Faith institutions functioning as political infrastructure when formal party structures are weak or absent. The question for Nigeria is not whether this is happening, it is whether Peter Obi has the strategic discipline to convert that infrastructure into durable electoral votes without allowing his campaign to be framed by his opponents, by the media, by the Northern Muslim establishment as a fundamentally religious candidacy. Because the moment that framing takes hold, his viability in the Northern Muslim disappears and his credibility in the secular Southwest collapses with it. Managing that line is the most delicate strategic challenge his campaign faces, and so far there is no public evidence that it is being managed with the seriousness it requires. Here is the data point that reframes everything. In Ghana's 2016 and 2020 elections, the party that won the Northern Christian minority vote won the presidency both times. Nigeria is not Ghana. The scale is different, the institutional dysfunction is categorically more severe, and the ethnic complexity is an order of magnitude greater. But the structural parallel holds. A candidate who breaks the assumed north-south binary by building cross-cutting demographic support creates an electoral arithmetic that the traditional power machines have no existing formula to defeat. The question is whether 2023 was an anomaly born of protest energy or the first data point of a genuine realignment. And the answer to that question will not be determined in Abuja. It will be determined in Jos, in Makurdi, and in Lafia.
Now, I want to give the opposing argument its full weight because it is not a weak argument and you should understand exactly why serious analysts make it. The most rigorous counter-argument comes from political scientists and northern analysts who reject the idea that the northern Christian vote is a coherent bloc at all. Their case is this:
Northern Christians are not politically unified. They are internally divided by ethnicity, Berom, Tiv, Idoma, Gbagi, Kilba, Jukun, and dozens of other groups, by denomination, by class, and by deeply specific local grievances that do not map onto any single national political narrative. The Tiv voter in Benue is not making the same calculation that the Berom voter in Plateau. The Idoma farmer in Benue's eastern flank has different land conflict dynamics from the Anaguta in Jos urban fringe. These analysts also argue that Obi's 2023 performance in those states was a one-time anti-establishment wave, a protest vote, and that protest votes by their nature are structurally fragile. They are driven by frustration, not loyalty, and they dissipate when the emotional intensity of the moment fades. In 2027, they argue, incumbency fatigue will favor a reset, and a reset favors a new face from the north, not a continuation of a southern protest candidacy. That is the argument stated as strongly as its proponents stated. Here is why it is right on the premise and wrong on the conclusion. The internal diversity of northern Christian communities is real. This analysis has never disputed it. But political blocs do not require ethnic or cultural homogeneity to function electorally. They require a shared strategic interest and a credible vehicle for that interest. Black Americans are not a monolithic cultural group. They span class, denomination, regional origin, and political ideology across a vast spectrum. Yet they vote with remarkable consistency because their shared strategic interest has been legible and persistent. The question is not whether Tiv and Berom voters are culturally identical. The question is whether they share a political interest that overrides their differences in the privacy of the voting booth. And the 2023 data strongly suggests that on the presidential question, they do. The shared interest is not abstract. It is physical security, land rights protection, and presidential representation that does not subordinate their safety to the political convenience of the northern Muslim establishment. That interest has been unmet consistently across every administration since 1999. It did not create a coherent political vehicle until 2023. Now it has found one, however imperfectly. Now, let me correct the misconception that most Nigerians carry about what actually happened in those states in 2023, because this misconception shapes how people think about whether it can be repeated. The dominant narrative is that Obi's 2023 northern performance was a product of the obedient social media movement, a urban, educated, primarily southern youth phenomenon that briefly crossed geographical boundaries on the back of Twitter and TikTok energy. That reading is incorrect. The voter turnout data from Plateau and Benue shows that Obi's margins were built on rural and peri-urban voters, communities without reliable internet, communities where the obedient hashtag was not the organizing mechanism. These were not protest voters radicalized by social media. These were communities carrying decade-long security grievances who found for the first time a presidential candidate whose coalition did not require them to keep quiet about what was happening to them. That distinction is not academic. It determines everything about how you build towards 2027. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. Let us look at the most likely moves from each major player in the next 12 to 18 months. Peter Obi and Labour Party face a defining organizational test, and it's coming faster than most of his supporters appreciate. The next 12 months will reveal whether Labour Party is building a national party or managing a personality cult. The specific signal to watch is whether Labour contests local government elections in Plateau, Benue, and Nasarawa with any real organizational commitment. Candidates, campaign infrastructure, ward agents, resources on the ground. If they do, the middle bet strategy is real and being built. If those elections pass with Labour making symbolic gestures and no genuine machinery, then 2027 remains aspirational and the 2023 performance remains unrepeatable.
The APC response to the Northern Christian consolidation thesis will be subtle, not frontal. The play is to amplify intra-Christian divisions in the Middle Belt, specifically to deepen the wedge between Tiv and Berom political leadership, who historically have competing interests over land and grazing rights. This is not speculation. It is the same playbook deployed successfully in 2019 and partially in 2023. Watch for federal appointments and intervention programs in Middle Belt states that are designed not to solve security problems, but to create visible patronage lines that pull specific ethnic groups back towards the APC. For PDP, the most dangerous move against Obi is not fielding Atiku again. It is finding a credible, non-Atiku northern candidate who speaks directly to the Middle Belt grievances. A governor, a senator, someone with genuine roots in the region and a coherent security policy narrative. If PDP locates that candidate and runs them effectively, the anti-establishment vote splits in ways that are fatal to Obi's electoral math. Watch whether any PDP northern figure begins building deliberate public presence in Plateau and Benue in the next year. That would be the clearest early signal that PDP has identified the same strategic terrain this analysis has mapped. There are 3 specific signals every politically aware Nigerian should be watching right now. First, the outcome of Labour Party's National Executive Committee restructuring, specifically whether northern minority voices gain formal party positions or remain decorative. Structure reveals intention. Second, any federal government move to restructure security architecture in the Middle Belt, particularly around the livestock transformation and ranching policy. These are not agricultural decisions, they are political signals about which communities the federal government is choosing to prioritize, dressed in the language of policy. Third, CAN's Northern Chapter. If they shift from civic guidance to explicitly political statements about 2027, naming candidates, setting conditions, mobilizing their networks in partisan terms, the organized mobilization of Northern Christian electoral power has formally begun. Now, let us return to the question that opened this analysis. Who is building the infrastructure to capture the Northern Christian vote in 2027? And is it Peter Obi or someone else? The honest answer, built from everything laid out here, is that nobody has fully built it yet. Peter Obi is the most likely beneficiary if it is built. The faith-based civic networks are laying the foundation, the demographic conditions are favorable, the economic grievance is at a historic peak. But the ward level, local government level, door-to-door machine that converts a sympathetic vote into a reliable vote, that machine does not yet exist in the form it needs to. That's not a disqualification, it's a window that is open right now in 2025 and will not stay open indefinitely because APC and PDP understand exactly what's at stake and their machines are not asleep. If the consolidation happens, if the Middle Belt locks in, if the organizational infrastructure materializes, if Obi manages the faith versus secular framing with the discipline it requires, Nigeria enters its first genuinely post-consensus presidency, a government whose political legitimacy does not rest on the North-South elite handshake that has governed this republic since 1999. The downstream consequences for federal character, for resource control, for the security architecture of the Middle Belt itself, they would be more structurally significant than any single policy any president has ever implemented. If the consolidation fails, if the bloc fractures, if PDP finds its Middle Belt candidate, if Labour Party remains a movement without a machine, then 2023 becomes a historical curiosity, a protest vote that found no permanent home, and the Abuja consensus reasserts itself, possibly for another decade. Here is the question I want you to sit with and answer in the comments. In a country where every serious political machine is built on money, patronage, and ethnic loyalty, can a candidate actually win the presidency by building on grievance and faith instead? And if the answer is yes, what does that tell us about every political assumption Nigeria has been operating on since 1999? Drop your answer below. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.